We have a very special treat as a part of our conference. I'm going to introduce to you, he's going to come up on the screen in just a couple minutes. I want to introduce to you, this is Bob Kauflin. Okay, Bob is the director of Sovereign Grace Music for Sovereign Grace churches. He's been doing that for the better part of 2 decades, I believe. And what Bob seeks to do in that role, he equips pastors, he equips musicians and church leaders in the area of theology, especially pertaining to music and the congregational singing and playing of music. So he provides a tremendous service. He's been doing this for a long time, and he oversees the production of albums put out by Sovereign Grace Music. You've been hearing a lot of that music during this conference, both yesterday and today. I hope you're liking what you're hearing and you're wondering, where is this stuff coming from? Well, there's plenty of that stuff to go around, and we're going to talk about those resources in just a little bit. So Bob also serves as an elder at Sovereign Grace Church of Louisville in Kentucky, a fairly recent church plant there, and we are thrilled to have him here. So, Austin, are we working? Is Bob coming through? We'll just try to get a feed going. There's Bob. Bob, are you with us?
Hey! Can you hear me?
We can hear you so well. Thank you.
Well, I hope they're liking the music, because if not, this could be an awkward moment.
Bob, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking, I know we have a short window to talk with you, and there's plenty we could talk about. If you don't mind, we just have two major questions we're going to jump right into to get right down to what we're hoping you can help us with, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And it's really a 2-part question. The first question is a why question, and we want to follow that up with more of a how question. And
Okay.
We've been talking in this arena about the importance of music within the church. It's not something we want to neglect. It's not something we want to overemphasize, but it does need to be part of what we do as a body. And so my question is this. Not all of us in this room are musically able, by our own estimation especially. Some of us would rather other people deal with the music, but our question is this. Since the audience is primarily church leaders or potential future church leaders, should the church leadership, whether or not they're musically inclined, should the church leadership be involved with the oversight and direction of music in a corporate setting? And if so, why is that?
Well, that's a great question. First, let me say thank you for letting me be part of this. I know if people know it's supposed to be yesterday, but I had something come up and you kindly switch things around so I could participate today, and it's a real honor to be here and virtually. And thank you to all of you who are serving in your church or would like to serve in your church in this capacity. The answer to your question is absolutely. Leaders of the church should be involved in what goes on musically. I start with Hebrews 13:17. It says, "Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account." That passage, along with 1 Peter 5, where Peter exhorts the elders, shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, being examples to the flock. There's a lot of, and I could share other scriptures as well. There's a lot of language in the New Testament, especially, that indicates God gives gifts to the church, leaders who are responsible for the care and the shepherding and the growth and the equipping of the church. Music is a part of that. The songs we sing aren't simply for expressing what's on our hearts. And a lot of people think of corporate worship as that. We're just going to tell God how we feel about him. Well, God's given us a hymnal in the Psalms, which they serve as a strong indicator as to what should form the content and the shape and the attitude of our songs to him. And while a lot of the Psalms contain personal expressions, a lot of them, the weight of what we find in the Psalms is a revelation of who God is and a dealing with who God is. And what drives the Psalms is not our feelings about God, but who God is and what he's done. And then everything flows from that. So a lot of the laments in the Psalms come from the psalmist being in a situation where his circumstances don't line up with who he knows God to be. So it's built around those objective truths. So Colossians 3:16 says, we're to let the word of Christ dwell in us richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in our hearts to God. So the singing that we do is not just for expression, it's for education. It's for edification. That's what teaching and admonishing one another means as we're singing the songs we sing. So the leaders of the church are responsible for that diet. They're the ones that God calls to make sure that the church is being fed the right things. And I always say that leading worship in the church, or leading the music of the church, leading congregational worship, whatever you want to call it, is a pastoral function before it's a musical one. And I believe that's what the scriptures tell us, that God doesn't require pastors to be musicians. Now, Martin Luther felt pretty strongly about that. He thought that the pastors should be musicians. Next to theology, music is the highest gift. But what we need to do, regardless of what we're doing, whether it's teaching through the word, through expository preaching, or through the singing that we're doing, we are seeking to care for those God has given us. We're seeking to instruct them, to teach them, to care for their souls. So when you view music through that lens, it's absolutely crucial that the pastor of the church, the leaders of the church, take responsibility for that. Now that can look different in different churches, different places. But to give you one example, then maybe we can talk about the second question, or you can follow up on this one. A pastor asked me one time, he was explaining a situation. He said, the person who leads the music in my church doesn't want to show me the songs that he's going to lead before Sunday. Should I insist that he do that? I said, absolutely, absolutely. You are responsible for what your church is being fed. Those songs form a part of what your church is being fed. Now, you may have a song leader, bring you a list of songs and a scripture and whatever else might be added to that, and you approve it. That's fine. A pastor doesn't have to come up with all the ideas, doesn't have to initiate all the ideas. You can have a group of people, put that together and present it. But a pastor, especially, should feel the responsibility before God. He's going to have to give an account to God for that church. And the responsibility of pastors is to equip the church for works of ministry, to preach the word in season and out of season, to reprove, rebuke, exhort with complete patience and teaching. So the songs become a means of doing that. So I hope I'm clear, making that clear. It seems that God would have pastors feel responsibility, take responsibility really for everything that the gathered church does.
I think you are very clear, Bob. Thank you. That's encouraging to me. I trust that's encouraging to everyone here as well. Thank you for connecting that for us. I do want to follow up with the second question here. It's okay, elders and leaders should be a part of that oversight and taking responsibility for that. That might be a foreign concept. That might be new ground to some people here. I've never had anything to do with music or in the order of service or whatever. So how do we begin to cultivate music leaders and to cultivate a healthy music culture within the church in the corporate setting? How do we cultivate that as leaders?
And how much time do we have? That could take a little bit of time. Well, I'll share some thoughts, and if you find something helpful, well, I pray that you do. and may God help us. If there's never been any connection between the elders and the person leading music, I'd probably go to whoever's leading your music, or whoever leads your music, and just say, been thinking about this, went to this conference, been praying, reading scripture, and I realized we really need to do this more as a team. I'd emphasize that you're doing this together rather than pulling the authority card. I need to be telling you what to do, because it could be you're going to learn a lot through this process. So probably so start there. There's been a change, and it's going to shape what we do. It's going to affect the way we work with each other. The first thing I think would be most important to do would be to come to a common understanding of what role music serves in the church. Because there can be wide differences in perception and opinions on what music does in the church. So, your typical musician who hasn't had any input from pastors or elders or leaders, through the years, could be thinking, well, my role is to get people stirred up. My role is to give people an opportunity to express themselves and meet with God and encounter God. And, and then we have the preaching, and, there you fill your mind with good stuff, and, that's good. But my role is to really touch people's hearts. Well, that's not true. Our role is to enable, as a music leader, my role is to enable the word of Christ to dwell in people richly. It's the word of Christ, not the experiences of Christ, not the music of Christ. It's the word of Christ, which boiled down is the gospel. It's what Jesus did to redeem a people for his Father's glory. It's the fact that he came as the incarnate Son of God to live a perfect life in our place, to die a substitutionary death on the cross, where he took the wrath of God for us, received our punishment, and then was raised from the dead for our justification and for our redemption. That's the gospel that needs to dwell in people richly. So that's a theological issue. That's a pastoral issue. So we need to make sure that's what's happening in our songs. So you could read, I would read a book together. The book that's helped me the most, it's a little deep, was Engaging with God by David Peterson. There's probably even some chapters in that book that would be helpful to just go through. Someone just asked me, what are your top books on worship?
Let's write that down. Let's write that. Could you repeat that one more time, Bob?
Oh, sure. Engaging with God.
Engaging with God. By
David Peterson.
Okay.
That was the book 20 years ago that just made me realize that worship is not, well, I put it this way, music is a part of worship. It was never meant to be the heart of worship. Everything we do through Jesus Christ for the glory of the Father is worship. So music's a part of that, but it's not the heart of it. So Engaging with God by David Peterson, Christ-Centered Worship by Brian Chappell, BryanChappell. Fantastic book that talks about how liturgy has served the church through the centuries and how we might think more intentionally about our services. But we tend to divide a service up into, music, the worship, and then the preaching. And those are kind of the two elements, and maybe, communion and something else. And he makes the case, both historically, scripturally, and personal experience-wise, why we should think of our meetings more as a rehearsal and a representation of the gospel in the presence of God and his people for our good and his glory. I found that very helpful. There's a book called Unceasing Worship by Harold Best, where he addresses the role of the arts in the church. And that I found that very good. And then one I read more recently was For the Glory of God by Daniel Block. That he was is an Old Testament professor at Wheaton. And there's some things I wouldn't quite see eye to eye with. There's in every book, but as far as a chapter on the role of music in the church, his is superb. And if you want something on the lighter side, I wrote a book called Worship Matters, where I try to bring the theological principles to bear on our methodology. So it may be good just to read a book together and get your bearings so we know what we're aiming for. And then in terms of how it actually works out, that's dependent on how much you trust your music leader and how confident you feel. So I work with a guy named C.J. Mahaney. I've been in the same church as him for 20 years, but I've known him for 40 years. High degree of trust between us. I still seek his input. He's my senior pastor here in Louisville, Kentucky, Sovereign Grace Church. And yet he trusts me deeply. So we might talk about something and in the end he'll say, but it's your decision. If you have a young person leading the music or someone who doesn't think very theologically, I wouldn't say that to him. I wouldn't say, you just go with what you feel. I would probably say something like, listen, let's try this. So if they're not employed by the church, I'd say, why don't you send me, what you're thinking, maybe sometime Tuesday or Wednesday, and then maybe we can have a phone call about it. Or maybe I'll send you an email, or some kind of communication about it, and then maybe we'll wrap things up on Friday, or sometime like that. So they're initiating, you're responding, and you're talking about it together. It might be that your music leader isn't even at that place, and it'd be totally appropriate for a pastor to say, you know what, I feel more responsibility before God for what we're singing. I want to start suggesting or letting you know some of the songs we're going to be singing. I know some churches where the pastor picks all the songs and the song leader just leads them. If there's going to be one way or the other, the musician choosing all the songs, pastor choosing all the songs, I'd go with the pastor choosing the songs. But it's better when you work as a team. And so it might be to say, I'm going to suggest some songs and then you build around it. It might be that you get together on Wednesday, or Tuesday night or sometime and just say, hey, let's look at this. And let's, we have a basic structure. So let's figure out what kinds of songs we might need. Now, let me put a little caveat out there. If you do this more intentionally, what you're going to find before too long is that your song repertoire isn't what it should be. When we start thinking more intentionally about the songs that we sing in our meetings, we can often find that some of the songs really don't do much of anything. That we sing them, people feel good, and then we go home. Songs are really teaching tools. They teach us about God, about how we're to think about our sin, how we're to think about our world, how we're to relate to God, who God is, what Jesus has done. All those things should be incorporated into the songs we sing. So often, when someone starts thinking more intentionally and purposefully about the songs they sing, they realize, wow, we need to stop doing these songs and we need to look for some other songs. And then people will say, well, where do you look for them? You ask people, Sovereign Grace has tried to write songs like that. We write intentional songs. A group called Indelible Grace has reworked a lot of hymns. We do some of theirs. Keith and Kristen Getty, of course, are putting out some great songs. And then you'll find songs in the contemporary genre that are helpful as well. But the idea is that you look at a song, not just for how it sounds, but for what it says. And that as that guides you, you just become more intentional about making sure your songs are filled with scriptural truths, that we're presenting a Trinitarian focus to our songs. It's not just all about Jesus. They're not just to some vague God or Lord. We are being specific that we worship a God we worship God the Father through the Son and the power of the Spirit. those kinds of things. It's not that songs that express our feelings towards God are wrong. It's just that we want to make sure we have enough doctrinal fuel for our emotional fire. We want to make sure that there is the doctrine, the theology of God's word, which is the origin, the initiator of all true worship, that we have that so that people can respond appropriately emotionally.
Thank you, Bob. That was a great answer, and that was what we were hoping to get to the heart of. Appreciate it. And I need to apologize that we don't have more time. I wish we could talk for much longer.
You are very gracious.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Please thank Brittany as well for being ready to work on the last minute like she has. And we're going to share some resources after we get offline with you. We really hope your visit to Montana was enjoyable.
I feel refreshed. Thank you.
I hope it's as scenic as the postcards portray. But you're welcome back anytime. Thank you so much, Bob. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and get offline with you now. Thank you for your ministry and for your work and for your contribution here. Could everybody please give a hand to Bob one more time?
Oh, thank you.
Okay. God bless you, Bob. Bye.
Amen. Thank you.
Okay, moving on from here. We're about to go on. Oh, Jeremy, yes, are you to talk about this? Okay. Okay. Yes, thank you, Jeremy. That's right. Doxology and Theology by Matt Boswell. That is a helpful resource.